Next on Life Focus.
I don't think that this Genesis story of Adam and Eve has anything to do with what we normally call science.
Respected professors searching for the truth. One looks outward,
I had this idea that there must be something behind it all.
while the other looks inward.
Genesis isn't just a report of events that happened a few thousand years ago.
Beliefs that come with consequences.
And after a while, it just becomes part of the routine. To have people writing that you should be in hell or you should be beheaded or something like that.
The quest for academic freedom next on Life Focus.
Life Focus is sponsored in part by the Cassid Foundation in memory of Elizabeth, Peter, Hank, Sam, Joe, and Ben Willis. CADCOR, connecting communities to reduce substance abuse and violent crime. And the Edgar and Elsa Prince Foundation, a civic-minded organization supporting the community through faith.
Hello, I'm Dan Meyer, and welcome to Life Focus. Today, you're going to meet two professors who challenge their university's traditional teachings. Both astrophysicist Guillermo Gonzalez and theologian John Schneider never meant to create controversy, but rather they hoped to begin meaningful discussion based on their research. What these professors discovered, however, is that when research collides with traditional faith or scientific teachings, academic freedom takes on a whole new meaning.
When I received my first small telescope as a Christmas present when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old and started looking up at the stars of the night sky, I was just awestruck by its beauty and grandeur, and I was hooked from that moment.
When astronomy professor and astrophysicist Guillermo Gonzalez arrives to work each day, he gives single-minded devotion to unwrapping the mysteries of the universe and sharing those mysteries with his young protégés.
An idea that I came up with is called the Galactic Habitable Zone, and it's basically that region within the galaxy where complex life can exist. And it's turned out to be an important unifying concept in astrobiology when people are discussing where life can be on the grand scale.
On a grand scale, life on Earth survives on a limited and improbable place in the galaxy where conditions to support life are met.
It has to be a certain distance from the sun. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's 400 times farther away. So people have noticed this coincidence for a long time, but they've just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, it's just a coincidence.
A coincidence that Gonzalez says may not be coincidence at all.
I had this idea that there must be something behind it all. It was just too orderly, too beautiful.
Gonzalez also observed that unlike other discovered planets, Earth's placement and atmosphere allows us to watch the stars.
The fact that we can see the stars at all, the fact that we live on a planet with a transparent atmosphere, an atmosphere transparent to the kind of light that we're most sensitive to. There's no reason we need to see the stars to exist.
Gonzalez made these observations while on a tenure-track position at Iowa State University. He published his ideas in a book, A Privileged Planet, which claims scientific evidence for intelligent design.
We claim to have found a purpose for the universe, and that's a big no-no these days for scientists.
The people who led the attack against me at Iowa State were local atheist professors. At times, I was, of course, very emotionally down. It was hard to say, give a specific name to it, maybe distraught, but I never lost hope completely. Always had faith in God that He would see me through and His purposes would shine through.
Professor Guillermo Gonzalez found himself under attack by atheist professors for challenging the status quo. But can the same thing happen in a Christian institution?
This was my office for almost 20 years.
At Michigan's highly respected Calvin College, Professor John Schneider faced a battle for his own academic freedom. As a theology professor, Schneider simply started a discussion about man's beginnings.
My concern was whether it makes sense anymore from what we know through evolutionary science to continue believing that there was an event known as the fall, in which the very first human beings did something in the way of disobeying God that ruined the entire world.
Schneider says that evolution would allow for a different interpretation of the Genesis story.
I've taught the interpretation of the Bible in the context of science for 25 years to students, and I think most of them would tell you, yes, there are very, very good alternatives to the way that young earth creationists are reading the Bible.
His theory suggests that rather than a fall from paradise into chaos, the earth has remained largely the same since its beginnings.
Start out with a world that is pretty full of disorder and brutality and violence and processes that are rough and apparently very wasteful.
I believe in God, the Father Almighty.
Traditional confessions or beliefs of the Christian faith, however, express a completely different view of creation and the fall into sin.
The confessions say that Adam and Eve in the garden were fully upright and righteous, and that before their falling there was no sin or death or evils of various kinds.
That's where Schneider's troubles started. He began to ask if it was even possible for the first humans to bring about this amount of chaos and tragedy into the world with just one act of disobedience.
Adam and Eve were not morally regal, mature figures to the extent that we could blame all the evils in the world on them.
The first few chapters of Genesis are at the heart and soul of how Christians have understood who we are, whose we are, where we come from, what we are for.
Jamie Smith, a professor of philosophy at Calvin, says Schneider's departure from orthodoxy goes against Calvin's traditions.
We want to cultivate a theological imagination that doesn't assume that it's either or. As if, oh, this new data has come in, we better abandon everything that we have thought for 1,500 years. So we want to ask hard questions, but we want to do that faithfully.
Schneider admits he did not remain faithful to ancient confessions that to him now seem to conflict with more recent scientific discoveries.
There's a tragic dimension to this. Once we are invested in a view or a set of assertions and say, well, that's the bottom line, and the evidence then begins to say, well, that view doesn't make sense anymore.
Schneider says his ideas are not anti-biblical or even new. In fact, he says the early church father Irenaeus held similar views.
I think the thought is, in Irenaeus, that a creation that is born of victory, that isn't tragic, that ultimately involves God redeeming people from things like sin and death and all the various evils that beset the world and its inhabitants, is a better world than one that just starts off smoothly good from the beginning.
According to Irenaeus, God created a world with potential for evil and one that needed a savior.
Now, if we think that's a good way to talk about the world and God's relationship with the world and Christ's role in the world as the Redeemer of the world and as the one who defeats evils in the final analysis, then we've got a form of Christianity that fits pretty well with what Darwinianism says.
But when Schneider put forth his views on Genesis in an academic paper and later published them in a scientific journal, he ignited a controversy no one expected.
I don't think there was anything that I would call an offense. I would say I was just surprised by how quickly the controversy began to grow and spin out of my control and anyone's control.
That scientific journal sold 5,000 copies in a week and needed an extra printing. It also brought thousands of visits to the journal's website.
It was kind of scary for both the school and for me.
An intense debate ignited around the country, one that generated deep animosity by some toward Schneider.
And after a while, it just becomes part of the routine, to have people writing that you should be in hell or you should be beheaded or something like that.
But Schneider says that this is not the first time new ideas rocked the church.
One of the influences in me becoming a Christian was Martin Luther. And I would read about Luther, and I'd read about how he tried to start a debate, and he put his theses up on the castle door. And Luther suddenly found himself in a situation that he'd never planned on. He really did become a kind of source of spiritual solace for me as I would think about the magnitude of what he went through compared to the little things that I was going through.
John Schneider and Guillermo Gonzalez realize that their research touches upon the fundamental questions every human being asks. How did Earth and life itself come into existence? Do we live on a meaningless speck, just adrift in an uncaring universe? For the most part, these questions of faith remained in seminaries or churches. But at a recent Faith and Life conference held in Austin, Texas, scientists met to discuss the role of academic institutions in welcoming and exploring these kinds of debates.
Is the scientific evidence for the Creator's existence shrinking or growing as we learn more and more about the record of nature?
Here in Austin, Texas, a group of scientists recently came together for a symposium to discuss the origins of the universe.
Scientists, whether they be Christians, non-Christian, or atheists, recognize that they're seeing design.
Astronomer Hugh Ross, founder of Reasons to Believe, says scientific discoveries demonstrate design behind our universe.
Design is not the issue. As Paul Davies, the agnostic physicist, put it, the evidence for design is overwhelming. The real debate is who or what is responsible for the design.
Author and atheist Richard Dawkins sees the apparent design in the universe as just an illusion. Other scientists argue that Dawkins' position doesn't square with the facts.
We see a degree of fine-tuning design that exceeds the very best example of human engineering achievement by more than 10 trillion times. And that's just one feature of the universe, the dark energy that controls the expansion of the universe. If the universe expands too quickly, all you get is gas. If it expands too slowly, all you get are black holes and neutron stars. To get planets and stars, you have to fine-tune the expansion of the universe.
Earth's position in the solar system between Venus and Mars, known as the Goldilocks zone, makes conditions for human habitation just right. In addition, our moon keeps everything in balance.
The moon creates most of the tides on the Earth, and then turns out the moon also helps power the deep ocean circulation, which helps moderate climate, which is important for life.
Just as scientists observe design in the infinite cosmos, they also find evidence for the work of intelligence inside each minute cell.
Scientists in the 19th century talked about the cell as a simple homogeneous globule of undifferentiated protoplasm. They thought it was something like Jell-O.
Stephen Meyer, a Cambridge-trained philosopher of science, says the smallest cells are designed with breathtaking complexity.
What we've discovered is that the simplest cells aren't simple at all, that they contain digital information, a complex information processing system, and actually nanotechnology, little machines that help process the information and do many other jobs within the cell. Bill Gates, in fact, has said that DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than any we've been able to devise. And that's a very suggestive remark because we know from experience that it takes a programmer to build a program, a software program.
Charles Darwin suggested that all species exist as a result of natural selection, acting on random mutation. But Meyer says what science now knows makes Darwin's theory insufficient.
To build a whole new animal, you need more than just proteins. You need more than new proteins. You need the proteins to be organized into distinctive cell structures. The cell structures organized into distinctive tissues. The tissues need to be organized into unique organs, and the organs and tissues need to be organized into what are called body plans, whole new architectures. So the Darwinian mechanism, which places all its emphasis on mutations in DNA, is not sufficient to build body plans.
With such powerful proof for intelligent design, many in the field believe that educators should present and debate that evidence in universities and even in high schools.
We think the teachers need to be free, the teachers need to be clear what they can teach, what science knows, and get it across to the students.
Ida Trotter, a former chemist, works closely with the Texas Board of Education. He wants to ensure that both the strengths and weaknesses of Darwin's theory of evolution make it into textbooks and classrooms.
We really need to have highly trained, well-qualified, technically competent young people coming along in our country. And the best way to do that is to teach all the aspects of science intensely, correctly, and without bias.
One issue standing in the way of holistic teaching of science, say Trotter and Meyer, is that some educators view intelligent design as unscientific or religious.
The media tries to portray intelligent design as a religiously based idea. It's actually a scientifically based idea. It's based on the discovery of nanotechnology in cells, on the discovery of digital information inside life, and the discovery of the fine-tuning of the laws of physics and chemistry.
But Meyer says many scientists still won't teach the evidence for intelligent design because of a philosophical prejudice.
The main reason that scientists still support Darwinian evolution is that the alternative is unpalatable to them because they feel that they're duty-bound to limit themselves to materialistic processes as explanations for everything.
We believe that design is not only real but detectable, that you can discern it by examining nature.
But prejudice goes both ways. Professor John Schneider discovered that his ideas concerning evolution and the Bible raised eyebrows at faith-based Calvin College.
The debate that I wanted to have at Calvin is a real debate. I mean, I think the doctrine of the fall, as inscribed in the Reformed Confessions, is questionable, it's debatable, and a conversation over it needs to take place, partly in the interest of compatibility with science, but also partly in the interest of what I would call a better and improved theology.
But Jamie Smith says Calvin College cannot abandon its theology based on the research of just one professor.
No one is debating whether or not God created the world. No one is debating whether or not we are created in God's image. What we're grappling with is how do we understand the nuances of that? What does that mean for how we understand sin and the fall and so on?
Historic statements linked to the Christian Reformed Church's beliefs teach that God created a perfect world, and man's disobedience brought forth the fall, infecting the world with sin and death.
So when we maybe are surprised by something, we know that we just need to work at how we can fit that into the story of God in Christ reconciling the world to himself.
I see my story as a very small microcosm, a very small part of a big story that is going on in the entire world of Christian higher education and in churches and in schools and seminaries. Institutions are locked in to this doctrine or that. They don't really have the religious freedom to make the kinds of changes that I think need to be made quickly.
So what happens when professors' strongly held beliefs collide with the keepers of tradition at academic institutions? Well, much like Sir Isaac Newton once said, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Professors Schneider and Gonzalez found out just how strongly their universe would react.
I was due for a sabbatical. A sabbatical in the academic world means they give you time off, usually a semester, sometimes a year, to work on a project, research, and write.
For Schneider's sabbatical, Calvin College approved a project researching the fall and the Genesis story.
I waited until that approval, after which I said to the editors, yes, I think I can publish the paper.
But when the American Scientific Affiliation Journal published Snyder's article questioning the doctrine of the fall and the heated controversy broke out, Calvin College administration canceled the project. The rejection by his own college, where he had taught for more than 20 years, created a feeling of despair and isolation.
There was one night, and only one night, I woke up, and it all sort of came down on me. It was like a great dark thing. And I honestly felt like I might die, like I couldn't breathe.
But much to his dejection, eventually Calvin College came to an agreement with Schneider, resulting in his early retirement.
We agreed that the best action was for us to part ways. so that I could conduct this project in the way I thought it had to be conducted, in a very forceful and first-person way.
A forceful way that challenges core beliefs with the Christian Reformed tradition.
Professor Schneider didn't leave because there's no academic freedom at Calvin College. I think what became clear is that how he wanted to pursue those questions didn't fit with the model of academic freedom that we have here, which comes with this sense of a responsibility to a wider community and constituency, which requires certain kinds of patience and sensitivities in how we ask those hard questions.
Smith says that Calvin does welcome intellectual debate and scrutiny, but insists that those challenges to long-held Christian beliefs should be handled delicately.
What we're trying to think through is how do we faithfully ask those questions in ways that are attentive to what the Spirit is saying to us, that take seriously what God is saying to us in the natural world, and seek to extend the tradition in ways that are faithful to the tradition.
But Schneider understands this debate between old traditions and new truth and calls the controversy a battle between two goods.
You have the one good, which is the whole dimension of being faithful to a tradition, to convictions, and all the rest of it. The other good thing is a person freely and openly exploring evidence, developing arguments, formulating perspectives and theories, somewhat independently of these convictions. Both forces in that collision are motivated, are carried along by people trying very, very hard to do the right thing, in most cases.
With a fellowship at Notre Dame University, Schneider says he can now share his views in a more open and perhaps less restrictive setting.
I have a very clear sense of who I'm trying to talk to. I'm trying to talk to a lot of younger people and some older people who are alienated from Christianity. Some of them tell me they've never heard a version of Christianity that makes any sense to them. I take it as a compliment that they think mine does.
Meanwhile, Professor Gonzalez found himself facing his own day of reckoning at Iowa State University.
It was revealed that the real reason I was denied tenure is because of my views on intelligent design.
After astrophysicist Guillermo Gonzalez published The Privileged Planet, his colleagues circulated an anti-intelligent design petition asking for his removal from the faculty.
The university and other professors were very concerned that I might be bringing, quote, religion into the classroom, and which is not true, of course.
More than 120 faculty members rose up against him.
I was told that I was denied tenure because I didn't meet the academic requirements of the university. But I think I did, and the real truth came out later.
That real truth revealed Gonzalez's stellar record of academic achievement. For example, the Chronicle of Higher Education called his books, textbook, and 68 published articles outstanding. In his research, he discovered the galactic habitable zone and 2 new planets. Even NASA calls on this accomplished astrophysicist for advice.
And at this day and age, in certain environments, in certain positions, certain jobs, there is a cost to holding a Christian worldview or even just a theistic worldview. Unfortunately, many people who hold to a materialistic worldview are not as tolerant as they would have you believe.
So Professor Gonzalez came to teach here at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. At this Christian college, he can now publish his findings on the evidence for intelligent design without fear of reprisals.
I feel like I am privileged, and I can observe the universe around me and discover its truths. And so I do feel like it's all been worth it, and my passion has not been subdued. I'm still continuing to pursue these truths and make discoveries, and I hope to for many years to come.
Guillermo Gonzalez and John Schneider believe in the academic freedom that allows for the exploration of new ideas. But they would tell you that sometimes the best ideas come when convictions conflict with tradition. And what seems like impossible obstacles can be overcome through faith. That's all for today's Life Focus. More information about this program may be found on our website or by calling the number on your screen. Thanks for joining me. I'm Dan Meyer.
More information on this program or how to order this and other episodes can be found online at www.lifefocus.tv. Please refer to the name of the program on the screen.
I believe my faith has been strengthened through these trials, as any trial would strengthen somebody in a number of ways. I think these trials have strengthened my faith by having to rely on God more, focusing my attention more on eternal things, not so much on the finite things.
Life Focus is sponsored in part by the Cassid Foundation in memory of Elizabeth, Peter, Hank, Sam, Joe, and Ben Willis. CADCORE, connecting communities to reduce substance abuse and violent crime. And the Edgar and Elsa Prince Foundation, a civic-minded organization supporting the community through faith. Pricing and ordering information for a DVD copy of this program are available on our website or by phone at 877-908-5433. The title of today's program is on the screen.